Over the course of 2017, the issue of free speech on university campuses has grown to what feels like a critical mass. Events like the protests against Professor Brett Weinstein on Evergreen University's campus, or the controversy at Yale University surrounding Nicholas Christakis' provocative Halloween costume email, bring up important questions about what, and often more subtly, who, the First Amendment's free speech clause actually protects. Tucked away on the hilltop, these questions might seem remote. But last semester, the Social Justice LLC faced some of these questions in a very real situation. In November, Director Chris Sloan canceled a talk by radical feminist author Julie Bindel after students expressed concerns that some of her previous work was transphobic.
Personally, I believe in deplatforming. It's very disrespectful, I think, to take the tuition dollars of marginalized students and then give that money to people who actively want them hurt or gone or dead or all types of terrible things. So personally, I think deplatforming is important. I think deplatforming works.
That's sophomore Veronica Carlton. She's a former teaching assistant for the Social Justice LLC and the special events coordinator for the Equity and Justice Council. She's talking about deplatforming, a kind of boycott that denies people or organizations a platform to speak. The idea is that denying a platform to speakers of extreme views or propaganda prevents them from spreading their ideas. But critics consider the approach a form of censorship. Julie Bindel referred to the cancellation of her talk on Twitter as McCarthyite silencing of feminists who expose male violence and abuse. We might gather she considers it censorship. So, should Bindel's talk have been canceled? Do we need to hear voices we think we don't agree with so we can critically examine why we don't agree? Or should we guard against the spread of propaganda? Do universities have an obligation to give platforms to any and all voices, or should they engage in deplatforming? These are all important and subtle questions. And on April 25th, the Center for Ethics and Leadership hosted a debate on campus that was perfectly suited to discuss them. Unfortunately, the debate was homogenized and poorly attended. Our crew wasn't allowed to record, but we came away impressed by the amicable, almost cordial vibe in the room. But then we realized both speakers seemed moderate, despite their claims that they weren't. They disagreed on the idea that speech and action should always be treated separately, but neither advocated for expansive exceptions to the free speech clause, and both expressed disdain for the ideas of trigger warnings and safe spaces. Essentially, there was no true voice of dissent. As student Joseph Vincenhaler told us afterward, I thought the debate was not a debate at all.
It's externally funded through the Charles Koch Foundation, so one of them had to have a roughly libertarian free market approach, which is easy because that's part of the debate, and I got to pick the other.
That's Professor Jack Musselman, director of the Center for Ethics and Leadership, telling us that St. Edward's on-campus free speech debate was funded by the Charles Koch Foundation. That's the Charles Koch, of the notorious oil tycoon Koch brothers, the same brothers who largely funded the Tea Party, the same foundation that The Guardian reported to have donated $230,000 to climate change denier Willie Soon. And according to an analysis of tax documents done by Greenpeace's Polluter Watch, the same foundation that donated $26,250 to St. Edward's University between 2011 and 2015. Separately, the Charles Koch Foundation contributed $8,252 for St. Edward's University's Center for Ethics and Leadership to host a Must We Protect Hate Speech debate and required a libertarian free market viewpoint be represented. Sometimes power exerts itself in insidious ways.
I think it calls into question the effectiveness of the conversation. I think it calls into question the intention. You can no longer just trust that it's kind of this heartfelt, open attempt to understand each other.
That can be said of the Koch brothers funding the debate, just as it could if notorious liberal philanthropist George Soros had. So then we have to ask, should the Center for Ethics and Leadership accept money from ideological organizations? And if they do, are they at a risk of a sort of inadvertent censorship? Could neglecting to give a platform to voices who advocate for heavy restrictions on free speech be considered a sort of censorship? It's a lot of questions. The answers aren't obvious. As we left the debate on April 25th, the Students for Sustainability performed a civil demonstration on Ragsdale Lawn. They weren't protesting the influence of the Charles Koch Foundation on campus. They weren't aware it had an influence. When we asked sophomore and Students for Sustainability member Paloma Ridge Rojas how she felt about the Koch Foundation's financial involvement in the on-campus free speech debate, she expressed a sentiment that seems to be the pervading fear on both sides of the political spectrum.
I'm using my freedom of speech to talk about something that they disagree with. I don't think they, if they believe strongly enough about it, would agree or even want me to exercise my right to some extent because of what I'm talking about and because they disagree with it.
Is it right to silence the voices we don't agree with? Is free speech under fire at St. Edward's? What do you think?